Apple just updated a whole bunch of their computers. The 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros have been updated with the M2 Pro and M2 Max chips, and the Mac Mini has seen a few changes. In addition to gaining the M2 chip, its price has been dropped to $599, or you can get a higher-end Mac Mini with the M2 Pro chip starting at $1299. There's certainly a lot to talk about, but today I have the 14-inch M2 Pro MacBook Pro. Let's take a look at it and talk about what's changed with Apple's professional-focused laptops. This is the base-level 14-inch MacBook with no customizations. It starts off with the M2 Pro chip with 10 CPU cores and 16 GPU cores, along with a 16-core neural engine. It has 16 gigs of RAM and a 512GB SSD. From the outside, the whole thing looks almost identical to the 14-inch MacBook Pro that came before it. It still has the MagSafe 3 port, 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, an HDMI port, an SD card slot, and a headphone jack. Despite the similar appearances though, that HDMI port has seen a fairly significant upgrade to HDMI 2.1. That means it can support 4K displays at refresh rates up to 240Hz, or 8K displays at up to 60Hz when one external monitor is connected. Similarly, the Wi-Fi built into the new machines has seen an update, now supporting Wi-Fi 6E. The update essentially adds more frequencies to Wi-Fi 6, expanding up into 6 GHz to avoid congestion and let networks spread out onto more channels. Visually, the most noticeable change with the new MacBook Pros isn't even on the MacBook itself, it's on the included MagSafe cable. This time around, the MagSafe cable that comes with your MacBook will be color matched to your laptop, either space gray or silver. This was the case when the M2 MacBook Airs came out, but when MagSafe first saw its return with the 14 and 16-inch M1 MacBook Pros, all the cables were white. It's a very minor change all things considered, but no doubt a positive one. The 14 and 16-inch M2 MacBook Pros have the same shape, keyboard, Touch ID sensor, and screen, including the notch, as the M1 variants. Keeping basically the same screen isn't a bad thing though. This 14-inch version has a 3024 by 1964 resolution, while the 16-inch version has a 3456 by 2234 resolution. These may be unique resolutions, but Apple knows the number of pixels listed on the page isn't what matters. It's how the panel looks to the human eye. And these look great. Apple refers to them as Liquid Retina XDR displays. Marketing keywords aside, they have an excellent contrast ratio thanks to the same mini LED technology as the last generation. When displaying HDR content, they can peak at 1600 nits of brightness, or offer 1000 nits of sustained brightness over the whole screen, while SDR brightness maxes out at 500 nits. As you would expect, they offer P3 color, True Tone, and Apple's ProMotion adaptive refresh rate that goes up to 120Hz for smooth scrolling in general use and even high refresh rate gaming. All in all, the screen just looks great, and it helps the laptop feel incredibly smooth. Speaking of how smooth it feels, of course I have to talk about performance and configuration options. With the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, they can be configured with an M2 Pro or M2 Max chip with either 10 or 12 CPU cores. On the M1 version, that was either 8 or 10 CPU cores. The RAM and graphics options also see improvements, with the ability to get up to a 38-core GPU with the M2 Max, while the M1 topped out at 30, and the ability to configure up to 96 gigs of RAM compared to the M1's limit of 64. Of course, most people won't configure up to that highest spec, but having more cores on even the base M2 Pro chip means you'll see the iterative improvement in single-core tasks with much more noticeable performance improvements in multi-core tasks. Apple says the CPU is up to 20% faster, while the GPU is up to 30% faster. While the neural engine has the same number of cores as the M1 equivalent, Apple says this updated one is 40% faster. And despite some initial confusion on the specs page, the media engine in the M2 Max versions still has 2 video and 2 ProRes encode and decode engines, while the M2 Pro has 1 of each. Hardware encoding is a faster way to playback and render video than software encoding, and the M2 chips have hardware acceleration for H.264 video, H.265 video, ProRes, and ProRes RAW. Now I have to talk about the pricing of the machines. Thankfully, we didn't see any real changes here. The 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M2 Pro chip starts at $1999, or $1849 for students and teachers through the Education Store. The 16-inch version starts out at $2499. I've had the M2 MacBook Air as my primary computer since it released, so I'm excited to be making the switch back to the Pro line with the 14-inch M2 Pro MacBook Pro. This has only really been a surface level overview so far, so stay tuned for more coverage, including a full review and comparison to the M2 Air once I've had a lot more time with the machine. I'm looking forward to really seeing where I get the most benefit from the M2 Pro chip over the base M2 through photo and video editing. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel for more from 9to5Mac.